Hi.
Thanks for being here, Matt.
Yeah, it's great to be here. How are you guys after this?
They survived. I have my Jack mask, but I won't put it on. It's probably too disturbing. I'm just going to start by asking you how you prepared for this role, because often people talk about an actor's job being about empathy, and you're playing somebody who it becomes clear over the course of the film and is even referred to as somebody who is lacking or has no empathy.
Thoroughly lacking
Yeah.
empathy, I think.
So how does that work in terms of getting into this headspace?
Well, playing the character at times, and especially in specific certain scenes, was very challenging. I think working with a wonderful group of actors, and certainly, and so, working, for example, in the scene with Riley Keough, where that was really difficult. Having somebody terrified in front of you, and shutting down that, any feelings of empathy or remorse. And I think, of course, it is a film about a serial murderer, and that is what it's about. But it's also, I think, an allegory for a story of a failed artist. And I think one of the reasons he is a failed artist is because of that lack of empathy that he has.
So what was your response when you first read the script? Was this pretty close to the finished film?
Surprisingly, yes. It was very, I was surprised at how faithful it was to the script, in spite of the fact that there was a lot of improvisation and a lot of, we never rehearsed. That was one of the things that was sort of, we had this mantra on the set. It's a Danish expression, huska sjusk, which translates to mean remember to keep it messy. Or to draw outside the lines is another way. And I think it's one of those Lars inventions, So there were little signs around the set that said that. And, that was the way we worked. There was a lot of discovery. And one of the great things about the experience for me was that there was this potential for failure that we all embraced, because to do something really exciting, sometimes you have to take the risk, to potentially fail. In order to do something, you have to be able to be willing to fall down.
So what did that mean in practice? Were you improvising in terms of deviating from the script? Were you doing a lot of takes? I mean, how did that play out in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's all about freedom. There was improvisation. We would do, but sometimes it wasn't necessary, because I had more dialogue in this film than I've ever had in any film that I've done before, and a lot. And, but we never rehearsed, and that was really that was the thing. We basically made a pact of trust with each other, Lars and I, and that was the way we worked, and I trusted him thoroughly. And one time I said to him in the scene that I did with Riley, and that was a really difficult scene for me, not just because of the way that he murders her, but because of the psychological, the way he treats her, it was very difficult. But I said, Lars, I said, I think we should rehearse this scene, because it's very physical. And he said, okay, let's do one like that after we do one without a rehearsal. And that's the way we worked a lot of the time. So there was a lot of, look, the film is very dark, and you saw that and you experienced that, but, the atmosphere creatively was not dark at all. It was very, it was a good atmosphere on the set, a very vibrant, environment.
I mean, obviously it's very dark and there are some very upsetting scenes in the film, but I think it's also a film that has quite a lot of humor, maybe more than you would expect. going in. I mean,
Pretty
like,
sick, Dennis. You thought this was funny. This is really sick.
I think they found it pretty funny too.
Good. I did too. In fact, at the Danish premiere, I found myself, and I was really concerned about this because I found myself not being able to stop laughing. And that really troubled me because, not because I guess I felt if somebody were to see me laughing, they would, I don't know. It was the moment when he offers her a donut. That was particularly for some reason, it just hit me. That was ad-libbed.
But I think that's one reason that Riley Keough scene is so upsetting, actually, is because some of the other previous murders have been kind of played for laughs a little bit more. And I'm just wondering about the tone of the film, which really is this very fine line between, absurdity and horror and disgust, and like just finding that. Was that just a process of experimentation, or was it like really, more about fine-tuning it with Lars and with your fellow actors? And
Yeah, it's almost like there's three parts of the movie, right? There's the 5 incidents that we see, and they're numbered in the film, and then there's hell, not Midtown and Rush Hour, but hell, really hell, and also there's Jack's life and his philosophical musings and that which. So I think that that was pretty designed by Lars. And one of the things we talked about is that because Jack has no core, really has no sense of self, that he can be many things to many people, which we see in the scene with the woman on the porch where he's like, well, I'm a policeman. Oh, I'm not really a policeman. I'm an insurance salesman, And so that the idea that Jack is really, he can be many, many different things. And, even in Jack's evolution, we see in the beginning, he's very buttoned down and he's very obsessive compulsive. And by the end, he's unraveling and he's becoming more reckless and leaving doors open. He just seems much more manic. And that was deliberate, and it was not something that, that was part of the design of Jack's deterioration.
how well did you know Lars von Trier's work before?
Well, I was familiar. I'd seen, Breaking the Waves, and I actually saw Europa or Zentropa, it was called, here early on, and they're so different. I remember being surprised at just how different Breaking the Waves was, and I was an admirer of his work, and I didn't feel like that I loved everything about every film, but there was always something in the film that really excited me, and was so cinematic and so, that it was so worthwhile to go see the film, and so I liked his work quite a bit. So I was intrigued by the idea of doing it. Again, not so interested in the subject matter, more interested in the process of maybe working with him.
Did he tell you why he cast you?
Oh yeah, he said he liked my face. Really? That's it? I said, and why do you want to do this film, Lars? I said, he said, well, because this is he said, this is the character closest to myself. And he said, except I don't kill people. I said, okay. And he said that most of the male characters that he had created in his previous films were idiots, and this was the character closest to him. But, I didn't find him to be sociopathic at all.
This is actually I think it's his first film since Europa with a male central protagonist. So it's been I don't know if he talked to you about that and why, because all the films, Breaking the Waves, Dancer in the Dark, Melancholia, Antichrist, they've all been focused on women.
Yeah, that's true. And we didn't talk about that so much, but he did say what he told me about, like, this was the character closest to him. And it's interesting. He hasn't done, so many great female characters, and his films.
Did you dig into that a bit more with him, this idea of the film as a self-portrait? I mean, obviously he's not a serial killer, but like there's, what were the affinities? What was he talking about? Was it just this idea of creation, failure, egomania?
I mean, I think that Lars is a, paradoxical kind of filmmaker. So I think I don't know how to say it. I mean, he's not a rebel. He doesn't rebel because in any kind of affected way. It really comes from inside of him. And I think it's what makes him such an interesting filmmaker, and, there's so many, like I said, there were just so many paradoxical things with him. I mean, here he is, somebody that's constantly making films about America, and yet he's never set foot here, And, it's like when you see the film he did, Dogville, that he would do something where he really created this kind of Thornton Wilder kind of version of America, and then he puts it on a stage with tape and just sort of somehow makes it artificial. But he went through all this trouble to get America right, and yeah, it is interesting.
And you shot in Sweden?
We shot it in Sweden and in Denmark.
Okay. Did he talk to you about his?
Because I think it's always Washington State.
Washington State, right?
Because it looks the most like Sweden, and he doesn't want to travel. He doesn't like to fly.
Did he talk to you about his interest in America? Obviously, he's made this before this film, the American trilogy, including Dogville, and he recorded a video introduction. Which concluded with him saying "good luck" to the audience and "never another Trump." So I'm wondering if there are ways in which this film could.
Did you guys applaud when he said that?
I think they appreciated that. But do you have a sense of this film, just as a sort of social or more political critique, whether this fits in with his other films about America?
Yeah. Well. Often I would discover things with him long after I read the scenes, and I think some of them are more deeply personal or psychological, but then there are things, I think, for example, his soliloquy about, he's talking to the children about the morality of guns and hunting and all this stuff, and it's very, it's the collective kind of argument that's happening in this country around gun control. It's like, this guy with all of his hypocritical statements and what he's doing and talking about guns and the morality, it's what's happening here. And then there's another school shooting or another mass shooting. And so I think, he's very aware of these things. And I think the scene with Riley in the apartment, looking out, saying nobody cares, and the justice in that, the policeman gives him a parking ticket, but lets him go after confessing to 65 murders,
There were early reports in the press, which I'm not sure if they were misleading, which described this as a Trump-inspired film.
He said that, right?
I don't know if he actually said that, but there were.
I think it was before. He'd been working on it before Trump was.
This character seems
elected.
way too articulate to have anything to do with Trump. But I don't know.
True.
All right, I think we can take a few audience questions. I think we have microphones, so if you raise your hand, we will get to you. Yeah, right here. Here in the front. All right, we'll get back to you after.
Oh, here you go. There he is, right here.
Hey. So you've worked with a lot of fantastic directors at various stages of their career. And obviously, every artist is different, but I guess this is kind of like a two-part question. What is something that a director in their early stages of their career have asked of you to get the performance they wanted out of you, as opposed to a more accomplished director in the career like Lars von Trier, asking of you to, pull that out of you and get the response that he needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the question, You know, often younger directors are looking for results, and so the direction is sometimes often not so helpful for actors because they want what they want because they want this to fit there, and it's not necessarily, it has more to do with the result than the actual process of it. I think sometimes the most simple direction is the best direction, you know. And Lars was really, he would give us a number sometimes. He would say to me, you know, 10% less, you know, or he'd say 175% less, you know. And he would get us to do things like that, or it needs to be bigger. And he kept things very simple. And we understand, we actors, we understand that language, you know.
So I think we don't have much time because Matt is doing screenings all over town. So we'll take just one final question from you right there.
Thanks for being here, Matt. Appreciate your time. The film had a few flashings of a contract killer named Richard Kuklinski, and I was just wondering what the connection was and why Kuklinski featured in the film, and what the director and the like were trying to communicate with Kuklinski.
Yeah, that was in the script, and I think maybe it was exploring that dark part of the psychopath person who can. I believe the line is like he wanted to breathe in his victim's last breath, and I think that was such a deeply disturbing, profound thing to say. It's maybe as evil as you can be, you know. I think that's why it was in there. And, you know, I mean, when Lars and I were talking, and, you know, at one point I said to him, hey, you know, it was like the understatement of the century. I said, you know, this guy's a pretty bad guy. And he looked at me, he said, you can't be worse than this guy, you know. And it's true, you know. He's a guy who's like it's like somebody born without limbs or something.
I'm afraid we have to end it there, but Matt's actually coming back in 2 weeks. We're going to do a talk with him, a free talk hosted by Film Comment on December 13th. So you'll have another opportunity to hear him talk about his work and this film. So I want to thank you, Matt, for coming and being with us tonight.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you all.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying.